The Tasmanian Community Fund presents the Breaking Barriers, Building Futures podcast. Hosted by Santi in conversation with Lesley Mackay and Ben Blowers.
Thanks for joining us. In recognition of the deep history and culture of this island, we would like to acknowledge the Muwinina people, the traditional owners of the land upon which we gather, and also those lands from where you are viewing this podcast. We acknowledge and pay our respects to all Tasmanian Aboriginal communities, all of whom have survived invasion and dispossession and continue to maintain their identity and culture. The TCF's funding strategy aims to help remove barriers to learning to enable 8 to 19-year-olds stay engaged and connected with their learning education. Like the rest of Australia, Tasmania is experiencing a digital divide between those able to access and use technology and the internet and those who cannot. One crucial area that requires Tasmanians to have access to digital content is education, with children's access to technology and the internet crucial for them to keep up with fellow classmates. The TCF sees the development of digital skills as equally as important as literacy or numeracy skills. Today, I'm joined by Lesley and Ben from the Smith family, who have kindly agreed to join me to discuss digital barriers for young people, and especially what they see given their on-the-ground experience. So, welcome guys.
Thanks for having us.
To start with, let's just talk about what the Smith family does.
The Smith family is a children's education charity, and we work with about 67,000 children and their families across the country to help them get the best out of their education. Mm-hmm. The families we work with are all on a low income, and we know that creates barriers in education. So the program actually provides additional education support in areas where the young person needs it, access to a family partnership coordinator who can help families overcome any barriers to education, and also financial support to help parents with the essential costs of education. We've got about 4,500 students on that program in Tasmania.
Excellent, thanks.
Yeah, I'd say, look, the main thing I think, and the most succinct way I could put it, is about trying to level the playing field a little bit. So with the financial scholarship that we offer families who are on the Learning for Life program, they can use it for things like excursions and getting school lunch bags, or lunch boxes, I should say, bags and, uniforms, and just one of those things that's going to enable them to go to school and kind of compete on a level playing field as best they can. And, hopefully that gives them the sort of springboard to be able to go on and succeed and do whatever it is that they want to achieve.
That's excellent. Thank you. So now we just move on to talking about digital inclusion. But the lack of digital inclusion, what sort of impacts can that have on young people?
Okay. So we know that, families that are on low incomes with school-aged children are relatively disadvantaged when it comes to digital inclusion. And so in the last 3 years, the Smith family have delivered nationally about 8,000 digital inclusion packs as part of our strategy, because we're really keen to see every young person digitally included who's accessing our program. And even with that, we still see about 30% of the young people that we're working with who are not digitally included. And that might mean that they don't have a device that's functioning that they can use for their schoolwork, and it could mean that they don't have access to the data they need, or it might mean they lack the essential skills, knowledge and confidence to use that. Yep. And so, or all three, and practically on the ground, Ben, what do you see?
Yeah, I think the isolation kind of goes to a few different levels. There's obviously the social isolation, because we know that I think anyone who's got a child or a teenager will understand how they like to communicate with their friends. But I think even beyond that, it can go to affect the world of work and how you access opportunities around like apprenticeships or even job applications. Now there's so many organisations that have now moved to a digital only application process. Centrelink payments, all of these sort of things that I think have gone that's the way the world has moved into an online space. And I think if there's for the young people who can't access these devices, they just find themselves increasingly isolated and actually increasingly disadvantaged when it comes to trying to access what's out there.
And I was just going to say that, like you said, digital literacy, just like traditional literacy or numeracy, is just a foundation now for participation in school, movement on to further education, and then participation in the workforce.
Yeah, and it certainly is in all parts of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
And ideally, young people need to be connected from what sort of age?
At different ages, you'd be looking at different kind of proficiencies being developed. And I think families make decisions about what's appropriate for a child in their family. We do see, though, that children as young as 8 and 9 who are participating in some of our programs, if they don't have a digital connection, they're not then able to go and participate into some of the online programs that we make available and that other education providers make available. Yeah. But there are lots of differences. So there's not sort of one age, but we do know that there are different digital proficiencies that need to be developed by certain ages. Yep. Yeah.
And Ben, you touched on the longer term effects. If we're looking at eight sort of age group, or even maybe a bit younger, and you're talking about apprenticeships. So that's quite a long-term impact. Is that fair to say that it changes their opportunities down the track?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, the way that families and young people think about technology, at least in the experience of the families that I've worked with, it's looked at as a tool or as a utility. And I think like any sort of skill or any sort of proficiency that anyone acquires, you need some time with it. You need to be able to know how to operate things safely and how to navigate in that sense. And I sort of think of some of the schools that we work with. I know introduced tablets into the curriculum from a fairly early age, and thinking of just the impact for those students who walk in, who have a tablet that they've been able to use at home and, know how to turn it on. And, they're straight away on a level playing field with everybody else. Whereas if it's the first time a child has seen or used a device, those feelings of shame or not knowing where it's at, the othering that happens, I think that is something that the families have sort of spoken to us about a little bit, because it all goes to a child's confidence and their willingness to attend school.
Yeah, of course. And all children want to be equal with their peers, of course, so that's a big part of it. You talked about the packs, the digital packs. Yeah. What's in them? I'm just curious, and that gives an insight into the sort of things that you might see as fundamental, I suppose.
Yeah. So the funding that we received from the Tasmanian Community Fund was for a program we called Digital Student to Student. Yep. And that funding enabled us to provide families with a laptop computer, access to data, and also coaching. And so those 3 elements are really the pillars of digital inclusion. Yep. To develop your skills and knowledge and confidence, to have a quality device that meets your needs, and then also to have access to affordable data. Yep. And they're the things that people need. And quite often, what we find is that families, they might have a device, but they lack the confidence, and it's a really hard thing to access the right kind of training or support in your community. There's a lot around, but sometimes you've got to actually have the confidence to know that you can ask.
Yep. And that sort of segues into talking about what are the barriers to being included, barriers to being digitally included. And you touched on a couple of those. So would you like to sort of just elaborate on what are the key drivers that are difficult to overcome?
Yeah, well, so we see, affordability is one. Yeah. So if you can't, if you're having trouble making ends meet, then a device can be out of your reach. Yeah. We know that young people or people on low incomes are often paying more for data than what other members of the community are, and we also know that there's that skill and knowledge gap. People who live in regional and remote areas are often more excluded
Yep.
For a range of reasons. And we see all of those things. It doesn't matter whether you're looking at the Australian Digital Inclusion Index or reports that have been developed here locally. Some of them refer, or a lot of them refer to just fragmented systems and services to support people to be more included. So there's a lot of different reasons why people are excluded.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that the confidence piece that Lesley talks about is a huge thing for the families and children that we work with, because it's hard. Like, it is hard if the first time you're using a device, and even for people who are proficient and use email and Microsoft Office suite and use that in their professional lives. I think everybody could relate to a time when their modem has stopped working at home and you're like, what's going on? And it's an incredibly frustrating experience. And if you kind of take that step back to the first time that maybe someone's had a laptop, for instance, and the administration mode comes up for the first time and you think, I don't know what that is. There's a sense of embarrassment sometimes to ask for help and say, I don't know what any of this means. And I think there's also an element that people don't know what they don't know. And the technical side of things can be a little bit scary for people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll often say that, for many of us, we learn, we develop digital skills at work, quite often being guided by somebody on the phone from your IT team that's helping you solve a problem. Many of the families we're working with don't have a parent in the workforce who's had access to that additional training, and so they're not having that experience at work that they can then take home and that share with their children.
I will say that another sort of challenge that some of the families that we work with have kind of faced is that while the parents' knowledge of technology is at a level, the child's is much higher, and then that can sometimes create issues in how to use things correctly and safely, and how to navigate that online space in a way that is not going to cause any harm for the long term. So,
yeah, and certainly safety is a big risk. What can be done more to help with safety and with the packs you provide? Is there anything around safety?
Yeah,
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we provide access to eSafety, and it's one of the screenings that we do with the program that you've funded.
Yep.
It includes a screening about people's knowledge of eSafety, and we provide a lot of resources to people and been on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes from conversations with the parents as well, because I guess we try to meet people where they're at, and we like to take a strength-based approach to our practice. So it is really just meeting the people where they're at, and that could be using. We really do lean heavily on the eSafety Commissioner and a lot of the resources that they have, given that they're aimed at particular age groups, and they're the expert in this space. We also have a good partnership with Libraries Tasmania as well, and we do try to have a lot of meetings there. We will use those spaces for for device handovers and whatnot. I think to try and get families thinking about where else they can approach.
And that way we can link families into the training and support, the additional training support that's being rolled out through Tasmanian Libraries. So that's been a really successful part of this program to link in with other supports that are available.
Yeah, to make them aware there is things and provide that connection.
And it's interesting because, we're talking a lot about children, but of course there's all the future workforce issues that come in relation to digital. Whenever we're talking about children, really we're talking about future adults and essentially participation in workforce and then, their future well-being and a whole range of other things.
Yep. And just touching on well-being, being included, being connected, it can have an impact on self-esteem and these sort of things that we've touched on. Have you ever seen that and just talk about that if you could?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I think there'd be so many examples across the organisation, but I think, thinking of locally, because we support, the Smith family has supported students all the way through into university space. And as anyone who's been to university recently or has supported a young person into getting into university, there's a lot of information is online, and a lot of the open days and a lot of the scholarships and all of those sort of things are on there. And I can think of a few occasions where the team have worked with people to build people's confidence and show them how to access, how to access open days and how to access virtual tours or come to a webinar with UTAS around what the opportunities are to study there, and just having someone to walk alongside them. The student themselves is doing it, but to have someone that they can turn and look and say, am I doing it right? Yep. Is a huge thing. And we've seen it through, just through the time that we've spent working with people, that they're into their second and third year of university and they're flying. They're smashing it. They're doing really well in their studies. They're fully capable in an online space, and they're succeeding. And that's what we would like to see with digital inclusion.
So you're actually seeing results, which is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's also really helpful for when you're having those conversations with families who have a young person who's at that kind of critical stage as they're getting to year 11 or 12 and they're wondering what they want to do. So being able to work with families to get people to be able to explore their options of, as I said before, like things like TAFE or apprenticeships or things like that, it makes all the difference.
Yep. Excellent.
And I think just to add to that, we have seen, recent research from ACARA that indicates that less than 1 in 3 Tasmanian Year 10 students are proficient in this area. And so proficiency, talks about, it's really broad. It's about those knowledge and skills and e-safety and the capacity to choose which technologies to apply to which type of problems. And so when we talk about the work we do with those young people from, say, Year 9 onwards, to make sure that when they hit tertiary, they're actually prepared for the world they're going into, it's really important. Yeah, it can be really important work that Ben and the team are doing.
Yep. And we talked about affordability, and I figure low socioeconomic circumstances is a big contributor. But language, so people that English is not the first language, is that an issue, a challenge you see as well?
It's definitely a challenge in the sense of making sure that everybody's aware of what's available to them. Less of a challenge when it comes down to capability with technology, because I think a lot of people do. Just not to say that people are at a higher or lower level. It sort of is roughly the same. The complexity, I guess, does go up a little bit when maybe relying on translators to check people's knowledge levels or to check their understanding. But it's certainly there is a cohort of families that we work with who do have English as their second language. Yep. And there is that additional challenge of making sure that we're really able to articulate ourselves clearly in a way that they're going to be able to, take what we're giving them and run with it.
Yep.
Going a little bit more broadly, cost of living has been an issue. So in the work the Smith family does, have you seen the cost of living impact starting to manifest itself in the services you provide?
We've seen cost of living impacts now for a number of years. Families are telling us they're doing it tougher, basically, that it's harder and harder to afford the essentials for school. I think we had quite a high proportion of parents telling us at the beginning of this year that they were concerned that they weren't going to be able to meet all of the costs related to their child's education, and that included digital technologies. And I think one of the bigger impacts is housing. For families. So we've seen a lot more mobility in housing, and then also access to essential services and medical services. And again, there's another digital interface there as well, because to actually find or even to make an appointment, I was talking to one parent who received a digital package through this program, who talked about the broader impact for her because she has a child with a disability, and for her being able to access the services and manage packages online on a computer instead of trying to do all of that on a phone before this device came to her family, they had a single phone with quite a high cost data package. So it's there's so much more now that needs to be managed online for families. Yeah,
and certainly maintaining the technology has a cost in itself.
Yeah,
and if there's cost of living pressures, something has to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people are. I think anyone who's listening to this makes choices every single day around where they're spending. But for some of the families that we work with, in the case that Lesley was talking about, where they're using a single device, if you drop it, which happens, and it smashes, and you're living in a area where it's not a 10-minute drive to go and get someone to fix it for you, never mind the cost of fixing it. But now all of a sudden it's a 20, 30, 40-minute drive plus, so there's extra petrol and all of these little costs sort of add up that go to increase isolation and, and can, it cuts people off, and it's a really hard thing. Yeah,
definitely. So what does it look like for families you work with? Share your experiences.
Yeah, please. Sure. Look, it is an individual thing, obviously, as every family is a little bit different. But, if you're thinking of families that only have a device, and let's say they've got a mobile and a laptop, a lot of people might think, oh, that's problem solved. They can do whatever they need to do. But it kind of goes back, for me, I remember, this is prehistoric era now, but remember when the internet first came in and you couldn't be on the phone at the same time as you're on the laptop. And it's not the same dynamic, but it's a similar dynamic coming in where people are needing the device for different reasons. So, mum and dad might need it to make an appointment for a telehealth, or they might need it for Centrelink reasons, or they might need it for even for entertainment purposes as well. And, kids are using it for social networking or reaching out with peers or doing homework or doing programs. So it can, limited access to devices can have an impact on family dynamics. And I think that's the sort of space that every family deals with and works through as they see fit. But having that digital literacy, I think, for the parents and knowing how to maybe limit the times or limit the sites that their kids are accessing has helped some of the families that we work with. Others, it's a case of just trying to get some more devices to make it work for their circumstances.
Good. Thanks.
And I think too, it's important to note that a lot of the families we work with are larger than an average family, and for some of those families, they may not even have the laptop. They're operating with just the mobile phone. They're in a smaller than average house with more than average children. So there are more people to share that with and the resource that they need.
Yeah, it has to stretch a lot further, doesn't it, in a larger family?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thanks for that. So we are getting close to the end, but just is there anything we haven't really covered that you just want to talk about?
Yeah, look, I think it's probably important to say that the digital economy is going to continue to deliver huge social and economic benefits. And at the moment, access to those benefits is not equally distributed. So in Tasmania, we see the Australian Digital Inclusion Index confirms that we're the second most digitally excluded state or territory in the country. And that sees us with 1 in 4 Tasmanians not digitally included, so more than 144,000 people from all walks of life, but particularly from walks of life people who are older, people who are living in regional areas, or the people that we tend to work with, and that's families on lower incomes and children. So it's really important to be really clear about who most needs interventions and what the responsibilities are of everybody involved. So that's organisations like ours and government and schools all working together to really target any interventions or supports well. Yeah.
And certainly that index talks about the more remote you are, the more challenging it is.
Yep, absolutely.
And the socio-economic factors, it's quite clear.
Yep, absolutely.
And Tasmania's, we've got our share of those challenges.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
yep.
Definitely. Okay, so we've got one last question before we wrap up. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you.
Question for each of you: if you had $1 million What would you do with that $1 million around digital inclusion?
Okay. Well, outside of, saying do more of the same, what we've just done with you, that's seen hundreds of families digitally included with a device and data and coaching and access to support. We'd love to be able to do more of that.
Of course.
But more broadly, I'd say address that issue of fragmentation and make sure that we've got really well-targeted, evidence-based digital inclusion programs where you've got cooperation of all the parties involved. We've heard organisations like TasCOS calling for coordinated approaches in this area. So I would say, whatever part of that $1 million we needed to make sure that what we were doing in this space and any dollar that was spent was effectively spent on the right people in the right way would be, my kind of vote for the moment.
Excellent. Ben?
Yeah, well, it's hard to disagree with anything Lesley just said. I think if that wasn't available and I needed to use it a slightly different way, I think it's about skilling people in the digital space and in digital safety in particular. And so whether that's a case of bringing the e-safety commissioner more involved or meeting young people where they're at, or even convening like a youth council of students or young people who are very digitally savvy, knowing that we have some great people in Tasmania who are doing amazing things in the digital space, games developers, YouTubers, all sorts of people. And I think maybe getting young people to do that thing I was saying before of walking with someone as they're going through their journey of understanding and how to navigate the online space a lot more safely.
And I think that point about, bringing the voices of young people in, if there's resources, it would be really good to do that, because I think that I don't have a clue how young people are using technologies. I know that the evidence says I probably don't know much about the future of work, and I'm the last person that should be talking to young people about careers and futures because I just don't know. So, it's finding the right people to speak about how we're actually using digital technologies and where the gaps and needs are.
Yeah. And certainly my experience with young people, my grandchildren, are all on devices. They're lucky they can have devices. From the age of about 3, they're on devices, active. They might be playing some form of game, but they're engaged. So the fear factor disappears. They're growing up with them. So it's really interesting. But the technology keeps changing and moving ahead. They're fortunate, others aren't as fortunate.
Definitely.
And that's half the challenge, isn't it?
And that is, it's part of it as well of access to educational items as well, because reading eggs and things like that, those online platforms are so wonderful at helping young people, like really young people, catch up on learning or catch up on their reading, and it's really about equality, I guess, at the end of the day, and being able to walk into school with a smile and knowing that you're going to be able to keep up with your peers.
That's it. Very true.
Yep.
Okay, well, unfortunately, that's time. We've come to an end.
Okay.
It's been a great conversation and covered a lot of the digital inclusion challenges faced. So on behalf of the TCF, please accept my sincere thanks for joining me and having this conversation. It's been fabulous. Shows there's a lot of work to do.
Absolutely.
And the efforts of organisations like the Smith family and to the little bit we can do, I think we can all work together to break barriers and build futures.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much, Rick.
You've been listening to the Breaking Barriers Building Futures podcast, presented by the Tasmanian Community Fund. The fund seeks to increase community well-being by removing barriers to learning and help Tasmanians to develop, deliver and lead responses to their needs. For more information, go to tascomfund.org.